if data genuinely has a seat at the table, if data is genuinely part of the cadence of the business and people can see that and they're not intimidated by it, if you can do that, and then you add the human spark of creativity and understanding and those big leaps forward, you will overcome the propensity to settle on local optimums, and you will be able to look at global optimums and be able to say, okay, how can we take the best of being informed about something and that creative spark that humanity can bring to something.
Hello and welcome once again to Behind the Screens. I'm David Hart and I'm sat as ever with my partner in crime, Mark McDermott. And today we're also joined by Paul Joyce. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, pleasure. So Paul is the CEO and founder of Geckoboard, and Geckoboard is a product that we've loved for a while. I think it's a great product, and we're really pleased to have Paul with us. It's kind of interesting. We were talking earlier actually about how it's really nice meeting other entrepreneurs who've kind of been there and done that and had a few kind of war stories along the way. And the thing I really I always like hearing is how a product came into being. And in mine and Mark's case with ScreenCloud, our background is in consultancy and helping people show what they're thinking or show their products in using digital media, and screens really is a sort of an extension to that. But I think it would be fair to say in the sort of 15 years that we've been doing it, screens haven't been central to what we've been thinking. They've come about almost as a happy accident in many ways. Although they were obviously integral to what we were doing, it's not like we were thinking about screens from the very beginning. But just looking through your CV, and obviously you've worked for a number of clients before, or companies before, Cisco, HSBC, ABN AMRO. I think the kind of area of kind of extracting data and then presenting it in a usable way is something that you've always done. So in many ways, Geckoboard was the kind of obvious culmination when you were going to start your business, that it would be something like that. I don't know if you'd agree with that assessment.
100%. I mean, I think one of the things that so my background was designing and building data warehouses at these companies. So large volumes of data, we would then structure it and then pass that on to a team of analysts who would then use tools back in the day like Business Objects and ClickView and Cognos to interrogate that data. And then the end result of that was reports that would go out, sometimes to the board or other parts of the business, once a month or once a quarter sometimes. And it seemed obvious, actually, that the potential for that data was so much greater. I mean, everything we do generates data, now more so than ever. But then there's what we did, what I did, which was the structuring and storing that data, fantastic solutions for that, and then finally handing it on to an analyst team. And it seemed that the last mile, the bit about getting the data into the minds of people who can actually use it on a day-to-day basis, that's where the opportunity was. So gathering, storing and analyzing that data, there were all patterns for that. There were all tools and processes and existing techniques for that. But people would then tack on communication onto an analysis tool, and whether that's sending out an Excel spreadsheet once a month or a PDF report or something that lives on a corporate wiki. And it just seemed that the potential for data was being squandered there, potential for data to actually have a seat at the table, for people for it to be properly integrated into their day-to-day working lives in a way that it meets them where they are, not them having to go out and find that. So I'd always, well, not always, but I for quite a while I'd been working on side projects, little ideas that I had, and they all had two things in common, and one was they all used data to help people make a better decision on some aspect of their lives. And the second was that none of them had any traction. I mean, there was a dozen different attempts here and trying different ways of doing it. But then back in March of 2010, the Mac software development company Panic, I don't know if you've come across them, but they kind of shared a screenshot of their internal dashboard. And I thought that was it. That was the missing piece. What if every business could have access to the most important data that they need in order to be able to understand the cadence of their business and make day-to-day decisions in a way that in a way that other mechanisms for broadcasting data simply couldn't. And that's where the idea of Geckoboard came about.
Excellent. So I mean, one of the things that we talked in advance about what things we'd like to cover today, and actually we're saying we've been chatting for a little while beforehand, and actually we'll probably come up with another 2 ideas for podcasts. It's quite interesting.
Yeah.
But the thing we wanted to talk about, I think, because it's something that we've just gone through as well at ScreenCloud, is the decision to re-platform as you're a SaaS business. So you started in 2010. And in
first generation SaaS, really. I mean,
there wasn't a lot of us around at the time. Salesforce clearly were going.
Right,
Zendesk were just on the ascendancy. Wow. But it was pretty early days.
Yeah,
it's mad, isn't it? We kind of think, the Wild West days of SaaS. When it's not even a decade ago.
It's crazy.
Yeah. But that's still back in the days where pretty much every aspect of the SaaS business you had to kind of build yourself or do quite a lot of bespoke work just to get operational.
Absolutely, and
not just the product.
Quite, and even understanding. I mean, I remember when we in 2011 going out and speaking to a bunch of investors, and I look back at my ignorance then. I look back at the obvious mistakes, and I went and I met with David Skock from Matrix Partners out in Boston, and he was incredibly generous at the time, incredibly patient with me, and at one point he asked me what our MRR was. And I clearly looked confused, and he gracefully he gracefully said, "What's your monthly revenue?" And we talked about recurring revenue and all that kind of thing. But it was a very different time. Can you imagine speaking to an investor today and not being able to not know the acronym? It was and maybe that was my ignorance, or that I was coming from a position.
I think also the language hasn't settled at that point. These agreed terms, they take time to bed in, and it's got to be adopted by. You can't just force a term in. It's got to be the ones that we all begin to settle on, and that sort of homogenization, I guess, of terminology or how you do things. That you got to go through a few cycles to know if it's the right thing to do or not.
I couldn't agree more. And you see that you probably saw the same thing, but you see the industry mature, and you see it coalesce around certain ideas and certain ways of doing things, some of which I think are incredible, some of which I have question marks about. But there is it definitely felt like it was more pioneer territory back then, and how you build a scalable SaaS business was more of an unknown than I think it is today.
Absolutely. I do sometimes wonder whether early or late, what is the better one? Obviously, now I look around and it's almost like everything's a bit SaaS. Even, quite a lot of consultancy businesses that I still have relationships with start talking about SaaS revenue, and I'm like, really, guys? Because it's just so on trend. And so, the beauty of it is that it's understood, it's kind of widely adopted, and in many ways it's actually almost sought after. Whereas, imagine back then you're kind of almost having to kind of justify why it's not a one-off license. And
we faced, a very early existential threat because of exactly that. So this is in the days before Stripe or anything like that.
Right,
so in order to get a merchant account, you had to apply to a bank. Some of those banks required me to kind of open an account with them before they would have a discussion around this, and we had to do that on one occasion. But we spoke to all of the major banks in the UK. And each of them had exactly that question. It's like, well, when do you mail out the CD, or how do the idea of software being delivered over the internet, and that being the delivery mechanism
in 2010.
It was
2010.
And so we couldn't get a merchant account. We couldn't get. We had no way of taking credit cards, and that kind of led to kind of a mild panic because I was running out of my own savings that I pumped into it at this moment in time, and before we raised any money, and I knew nothing about raising money, and so then went down the route of trying to get PayPal Website Payment Pro or whatever it was.
That's not even that straightforward either.
It wasn't straightforward, but they rejected me, and they rejected me because I I didn't know this actually. So the story is that I applied for them. They came back with a rejection. I asked them why. They said they couldn't tell me, but if I apply again in 90 days, they'll have another look at it. And I said, well, unless you're telling me what's wrong here, I'm not going to be able to make any changes to this. And they couldn't tell me that it was against their policy. And so all of the high street banks were out. Now PayPal were saying that they couldn't process our credit cards. I was running out of cash at this moment in time. Didn't know where to go.
So what, people were sending you checks in the mail or something?
Well, we weren't charging for the product at this point in time. Right. So it was coming to a point where we were coming out of alpha, coming out of beta, and I was looking to get like, how do we start collecting money for this? We had we had 9,000 people on our waiting list. We were people who were actually willing to pay for this product, and I wanted to get through that. And so pure happenstance, pure luck, my daughter was going to a preschool, and my wife dropped her off at the gates and started mentioning to one of the other mums about this scenario. This is what happening. It's very, very frustrating, and PayPal aren't kind of being very responsive to us, and we can't find out. And it happens that her sister-in-law, the mum that she was speaking to, actually had a role in PayPal and looked after as part of the European business.
Wow!
And I was able to get a call. And explain the situation to her. And the following day, we were approved, and I found out the original reason for the disapproval, and that was because I turned a personal PayPal account into a business PayPal account, and I'd sold a couple of years earlier. I'd sold a PS3 secondhand. The guy didn't want to come pick it up, and so he issued a chargeback instead of cancelling the order and going through all that. He issued a chargeback without even ever picking the unit up, and that was seen as a black mark by PayPal on the business, and I would have never known that.
So you would have spent 90 days going through your business plan, every little like unit economic that maybe some analyst and it's some freaking guy who just couldn't be bothered to turn up and take your PSC off you for 80 quid or whatever.
Yeah, and decided to issue a chargeback against you instead.
My God.
So just...
banks, seriously.
Come on.
That's why Stripe is murdering them.
So the moral is, have children, because you just...
Networking.
You just don't know how it's going to...
Preschool mafia,
just an incredible stroke of good luck, good fortune. But I think that speaks to just how we've how far we've progressed as an industry now.
I have a theory about luck though, because actually I do, but like many people, I think luck is something that you can coerce, and obviously it's hard that the science or whatever of luck is somewhat difficult, but basically openness leads to good fortune. Openness and honesty. So what you were basically saying, and obviously your wife's a similar character. I've not met her, but I'm guessing similar, is the fact that she was being open about a problem. That, she wasn't kind of going up to the school gates going, "Oh yeah, it's all going great, wonderful." Like she was saying, actually, we've got a problem really, and it kind of sucks. And that humble and open honesty meant someone went, you know what, I'm going to help that family.
Or they just even knowing about it. Even the fact that she was able to articulate that, this is the problem, and someone was able to identify that they can help at this point. But I completely agree. I think some people, they call it increasing your luck surface area, right?
Yeah,
it's about allowing yourself to be more lucky. And there is a huge... For me, I think there's huge power in vulnerability. There's a huge power in opening yourself up like that. And I think, a few years ago, I talked at a Hacker News London meetup, and I talked about this tendency to, David and I were briefly touched on it before you got here, but this tendency for particularly very young startups to, we're crushing it, we're killing it, it's all good, whatever else, and how that can warp people's perspective of what it is to run a business like this. It isn't all, sunshine and happy days and skipping over rainbows. This is actually, it is brutal, and it is hard, and it is taxing, and you get blindsided quite a lot, and being able to speak about that is a very liberating thing. And I feel like that is something that I like to do, because it helps me, but I also think that it gives permission for other people to say, if somebody asks how you're doing, instead of I'm crushing it, I say,
Yeah.
well, I'm having a good month this month, or last month was really poor, or like I'm really struggling with this, or I've got concerns about like somebody leaving the business that like is really key, or we're finding it difficult to recruit this key role or whatever else, and it gives permission for a more substantive conversation to happen.
And it's getting worse really, because like I kind of look at, say, like for example, sort of social profiles as well. It's about like things like living my best life. What in the hell does that even mean? Like, I mean, I was going to be like, there's 3 old guys having a moan about social. Who would have thought it? But like, because my Instagram following is not very good. But no, but there's something about that. Like I've been doing some guest lecturing at UCL, because I have a relationship with UCL from a business course.
I did that some years ago as well.
Yeah, it's just at your School of Entrepreneurship, and so like once a term I go in and I do like I'm non-academic. I'm not really very academic at all, to be honest. But my lecture to the entrepreneurship school is purely on practical lessons. I mean, there's no point me even trying to. Here's a model of how we did it. It's like, here's the story of how we did it.
Yeah.
But what I try to do, because I do an open Q&A at the end, so like lecture for about 45 minutes and then 45 minutes Q&A. And invariably, none of the students ever actually ask me about the lecture. What they all ask me about is, how do I start a business? How can I want to start a business as soon as I graduate. Actually, sod that, I want to start a business whilst I graduate. And how do I raise money, and how do I do it, and like where should I get engineers? And it's like, whoa, just a minute, we haven't talked about what you want to do. What are you good at? Like, what are you interested in? What's the problem you want to solve? What's the reason?
And the journey that you describe, start a business, get funding, hire engineers, do this kind of thing, that is a specific journey, a very specific journey.
Yeah.
And there are other available options as well.
Exactly. Yeah. Other brands are available.
But I think it's very easy to get caught up in the frothiness of it all.
And also that this journey is a very new one. I mean, like my family ran a family business consultancy. My mum and dad worked together, still do a bit, for like over 20 years. And they never thought about raising money. Like, how do you do that? Yeah. Like, I mean, it was funded out of cash flow. That's how we did our business before. And this whole venture product, this is new. I mean, this is literally new. I mean, you were there when they didn't even know what the acronyms were.
Well, I didn't know what the acronyms were.
I don't think it's a personal thing. I think honestly, those acronyms there was probably about 50 different ways of explaining it at the time.
Yeah, I think that from the outside it's easy to see though. I think these are the things that, particularly back in the day when you used to read. I used to read the tech press. I don't really anymore. But you'd see these milestones, the announcements of funding, the announcements of kind of new teams coming on board and whatever else, and that somehow becomes a proxy for what it is to run a business. And I think it also tipped on this idea of startup advice. Like right now, there is like playbooks, and certain people who say this is a prescribed way of doing things, or this is the way you should do it, and people are making very good living, getting very good following doing that kind of stuff. Whereas as opposed to like the Wild West days when we were figuring it out. But I don't know how useful advice is. I think there are certain things that are absolutely universal and whatever else, but everyone's journey to this is going to be unique, and every business is going to be different in some kind of subtle or substantive way. And I learn most from hearing people's stories. I learn most from like the exceptions, not where things have necessarily gone well, but actually hearing that, okay, these problems that I have are not unique to us. They're not unique to Geckoboard. They're not, these are things, whenever I talk about them, I always hear the recognition come back. And I think that there's, having an honest discourse about that is probably more helpful than here are the top 10 things you need to do as a new SaaS business.
I agree. I saw this crazy tweet yesterday from someone. It was someone quoting someone. So this guy basically paraphrasing said, "Oh, my startup business has completely failed, so I'm going to now become a business mentor." And I was like, I mean, obviously the tweet was kind of going, is this wise? Normally, like, mentorship should come from a little bit of success first. But I was thinking about advice, because I think advice maybe for me falls into two categories. There's what I would consider binary advice. So, example, you're hiring your first employee in the US, you're from Europe, and you have no clue. An expert says, right, the best way to structure this is this. That's advice where I go, okay, let's do that.
Yep.
And then there's advice which I think what you're alluding to, which is subtle. Like, here's 3 options. Actually, all 3 are potentially viable, and no one really knows what the right outcome in this example for your unique business in your unique piece of time will be. And that's where stories, because stories teach you how other people have considered their own unique problems, and it can at least give some perspective on how you might go and face yours. But ultimately, that problem is yours, and the person best to decide is still you, the founder.
Yeah.
And I think that the advice world should, those top 10 things, those freaking lists and stuff, they should probably focus more on that binary stuff, which is like, if you're looking to open in the US, do this,
here's
this,
a
and
checklist.
this. Because here's a checklist, just get it done. Dan Glazer is brilliant for that. He literally has a checklist on an A5 piece of paper. Every time anyone mentions USA, he just gives them that and says, just do that, and you start well.
Yeah.
It's absolutely, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And then there's what these students are basically asking for, which is, hi, Mark, that was very interesting. I'm not going to mention that lecture anymore. What I'd like to know is, can you please pass on your silver bullets? And I kind of, always go back to the fact that, look, you're 20, it was 15 years of working together before we even got close to something resembling success. And to be honest, it still might not be the big, it's looking good so far.
Yeah.
Right, woohoo. Yeah. But things can change.
Yeah. It's that thing, isn't it? Like that sort of concept or myth of overnight success that people always sort of like, oh my God, Slack, they came from nowhere. I mean, maybe they did.
It didn't.
They were a games company, weren't they?
Yeah,
and then
they
built an internal tool.
And the founder had also done Flickr, right?
Yes.
I mean,
and then was it
experienced guy.
Do you remember Angry Birds? That kind of classic. It was
Game 51.
51 or whatever. Yeah. So, but there was that sort of, I want a shortcut, and actually all I need to do, as you say, if I can do these 3 things, if I just get funding, I've got a brilliant idea. That's pretty much all I need. Oh, I need some engineers. And then that's the harder bit down, and then the next bit is just kind of sitting back and waiting for the money to come in.
Yeah. And it's like, I just hate to pop this balloon.
maybe we shouldn't. Maybe that's not maybe that naivety. I mean, certainly I know from my perspective, if knowing everything up front that you potentially have to wade through in order to get some modicum of success. I mean, that's an intimidating prospect. That's a cliff face.
Yeah.
And actually, I not think that it's a gently sloping hill to and as you become more immersed in that, you actually realize, actually these are the rough edges. These are the bits that haven't been worked out. This is the bit that's not on rails. These are the bits
true.
It is. I have to make a call here.
It's like you've got to let a kid touch the candle. It can't just be, it will burn you forever. Like eventually
experiential
you need to,
knowledge.
Okay, I see what you mean now.
Gotcha.
Well, presumably that's what does happen when they then leave university and go, right.
Yeah, well, I mean, like,
I'm going to send 50 emails today to all the VCs that I've found on Google.
Yeah.
So who
for the office
in
to come
Facebook? I'll contact them. I mean, it should. I mean, I hope that doesn't come across as patronising or negative as it is supposed to. It's just more like, I suppose this is the point of this podcast is, when we first started this podcast, we didn't really know. We thought, let's do a podcast because podcast, that's honestly why it happened. And then we thought, all right, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the problem, as in everything about. But then we realised that we would probably run out of things to say after about 3 or 4 episodes, and so we kind of came back to the idea that maybe that wasn't such a hot idea, and it would be a bit dull. And so we just thought, well, let's use it as kind of therapy, really. And that's I think
that's one of the most useful thing about getting kind of founders and entrepreneurs in a shared space is the ability to trade like war stories and horror stories and dismay and little nuggets of useful information and little bits that come out that kind of on aggregate.
And it's those little nuggets of oh yes, that happened to us, but in a slightly different way.
Yeah. And even hearing how different people articulate the same problem or view the same problem or look at different solutions to that. That's so enriching. That is, it's a very, it can be a very stimulating thing. I mean, I know that you guys were at the 0.9 founders
Yeah.
meetup, and I think that's a great example of that.
Yeah,
a group
everyone
of
you
people.
speak to, there's no sort of wannabes there. Everyone's actually done it and been there.
And in the trenches, and some of them for a dozen or more years. Some of them are just fresh faces to it all. But it there's something to be understood or garnered from each of those conversations that is so beneficial and helpful.
So shall we talk about what happens then when you're going along and you've got this product and it's working, and then you kind of come to the realization.
Yes.
PayPal says yes. You're a few years along, and you come to the realization, maybe this product doesn't quite solve the problem that I see emerging, or the problem that we potentially want to.
So the replatforming.
Well,
in your case, so replatforming in our case wasn't so much that we'd like because there's pivot, right? Which is like, oh, actually, people don't really want this thing as much as I thought they did, so let's pivot slightly to what they do. But replatforming can also just be, we're right, but technically this isn't quite the best way to solve it, because now we've got experience with loads of customers. We've realized that technically we've kind of sold ourselves down the river a bit. What was the case for you? I'm imagining, because you've always been a dashboard company, right? You haven't really pivoted.
No.
That your replatforming was more about, the approach we've taken, which is very much akin to the ScreenCloud's replatforming we're going through now, was like...
And you were like 7 years off into the journey.
Yeah, but that was our most recent one. But yes, we had done it a little earlier on as well. And I think it comes down to exactly that. So what are the driving forces behind this? Because selling that it's a very difficult thing. I mean, some parts of the team are gunning for it. I think,
the engineering team,
absolutely.
typically.
Absolutely. Because there are certain advantages to that, and they can see that kind of
and
the
a bit
grass is
shiny
greener,
and new
and all of those kind of things. At the board level, at the leadership level, my comfort levels with it felt to me that there had to be a very clear case for it. And for me and for Geckoboard, I think there was, just stepping back, we talked about screens, and we talked about TV screens and the power and the importance of that. And we were all in on that from the get-go, and there was a couple of reasons for that, and that is, we talked about the potential of data, the gathering and communication being the last part, and I felt very, very strongly that broadcasting data, decoupling the link between an individual and how they consume it, so they're not consuming it on their personal device anymore. It has been broadcast out to them. Meaningfully changes how people perceive that. And if you can join that with a way of ingesting data very, very quickly that is designed for how our brains are designed to do that, then the belief was we now have not just a new piece of software. Okay, so we have. Essentially, we're defining the bounds of a new market because data communication has not been taken seriously before. It has been tacked on to analysis tools, whether that is Excel or Tableau or whatever else. It's been tacked onto that. But actually, if we think it's important, if we think this is something in its own right that needs to be tackled, that has its own set of constraints and its own set of limitations, then we need to do something for that. So part of our journey was not just discovering, doing customer marketing and understanding kind of getting product market fit and all of that kind of stuff. It was actually understanding the nature of the problem that we were coming up against, and there were no patterns, and I still believe there are no patterns for existing software companies that are doing the similar sort of thing to what we're doing in the way that we view that. TV first as a broadcast mechanism to get data into the hands of people who don't usually have data as part of their day-to-day workflow. And so we had to find out what were the parameters of that. What were the difficulties there? Where were the difficulties in scaling, the technological uncertainty, all of that kind of stuff? We had to discover that ourselves. It's not like we're just building a CRM, right? Where we can say, okay, let's look at what Salesforce does and tweak a few things, whatever else. It is, how do we define this as a new type of software? And one of the principal differences that kind of led on to a lot of the conversations around replatforming, one of the principal differences is how live and rich is that data. So Geckoboard connects to multiple different services, SaaS services usually, also internal databases and spreadsheets and all of that kind of, we have an API. But we are primarily connecting to third-party APIs, Google Analytics, Facebook, Zendesk, Salesforce, all of this kind of stuff. But we're not doing it in the typical way that other dashboard vendors have done it, where they kind of say, okay, we can update once a day or maybe once an hour, right?
Yeah.
Like that. We're talking about how do you close a feedback loop, make that really, really tight. And so in some cases, we are talking about fairly richly computed metrics from these third-party APIs that need to be refreshed very quickly, sometimes once a minute.
Yeah.
And so that is a materially different set of challenges to other reporting challenges that were out there. And it took us a while to figure out what were the primary drivers, what were the things that we were going to have to innovate on or invent in order to make this work, because there wasn't a pattern that we could easily pull from.
It was just something that Luke's the third co-founder, the CTO.
Yes.
When we first were building ScreenCloud and we were talking about the very first feature set, I never mentioned it, and Luke really did it out of instinct. I actually don't really know. I have to kind of ask him why, but he made ScreenCloud Realtime. And I thought, well, that's cool. I mean, everything's nice if it's real time, just feels a bit snappier. But, I didn't think it was a driving feature. Like, it wasn't on my list at all. I just thought, so long as it's relatively responsive. And you know what? I completely missed the trick on that. The real time, the fact that you make a change and boom, the screen updates is the magic.
Yeah.
And that's one of the big, unknown things, but our customers, their eyes light up and it delights them. That responsiveness, that immediacy, it feels like magic's happening in the air. And so for him to include that and put that as a driving principle of the technology, even though it doesn't go in a feature list really. No. I mean, it kind of does now because people really like it, but it is what you're saying is you're making the data magic because then you're seeing this number that is in effect real time or as close to it as possible.
Yeah, we like to say live. I worked in an investment bank. Real time means something very different to that.
Oh right, yeah, true. Yeah. So all the terminology, but the fact it's live makes it human.
Yeah,
because that number increments, that there's a person there. Like if that incremental thing was people waiting on the phone to talk to customer services, the moment it changes, there's a human being waiting right now. But if you know that data is within an hour, you feel less connected to it emotionally. I don't know if it's...
No, I 100%. I couldn't agree more. Agree more. And I think you also have to look at how do people, what are the lens through which people look at TVs anyway? Well, they're used to it live. That is it. That is the principle kind of it is something closely associated with that.
So was this driven by your customers' frustration, or was it more you saw an opportunity and thought, if we can do this, we think we will be able to delight more of our customers and sell more?
So I think there was two driving forces behind this, and the one we're talking about in 2017, the most recent one, we call our data in or data ingestion platform. There's an opportunity cost in doing something like this, and it's scary as fuck is the reality, because if you're spending time doing this, and it isn't a trivial job, it's not a couple of commits, it is you've got to commit to a schedule of work that will take a lot of time, and that will materially impact.
Does that ring any bells?
It's if I start to cry, it's very raw right now. Someone's cutting an onion. Yes, but everything you're saying is landing rather significantly.
Okay, all right.
But carry on.
That is the difficulty, isn't it? Because it's all well and good thinking about the brave new world that we can kind of that we can envisage. But there has to be there is a genuine trade-off there. So the question then becomes, okay, right? Is there a benefit to the customer above and beyond anything that we could have shipped in the interim time that would have provided more immediate benefit right there? What are the benefits can we hook into? And we believe that there was definitely a customer benefit. That was the primary driving motivation here. And there's a couple of reasons for that. First of all, yes, more responsiveness, great. Second of all, a lot of the APIs that we interact with were not designed for pulling aggregate data, right? They show a lot of granular data, and then we would have to paginate through many pages of their API, using our customers' API limits, putting pressure on third-party servers, all of that kind of stuff. So if we're going to do this, we have to do it right. We greatly value the relationships that we have with our third party like API providers, our mutual kind of we have mutual customers with them for a start, but second of all, we take a meaningful part of a lot of third-party APIs.
You could be a leech on them. I mean, you could be a reason for extreme expense.
I remember you telling us about the percentages.
Yeah.
You probably don't want to share it, but
for some like very, very well-known, very well-used services, we are the majority of their API. Sometimes up to 50% of their API capacity is spent on Geckoboard. And so it's important to us that we're able to do that in a way that is not only good for our customers, and so in other words, they can get that data in more quickly and all that kind of stuff there, and that doesn't completely leach their rate limits with the third party, but that we're cognizant of the impact that we're having on those third party partners, and so we had to design a system that was if we wanted to do this, we had to be aware of that. If we wanted to build this business, and that was important, it had to be. So we had to. So that was another element.
Ethical engineering.
Well, but also you could say ethical engineering, but another part of it is just thinking, well, we don't want to get cut off from these guys, right? This is our lifeblood, and there's a huge risk here, and it's incumbent on us to be mindful of that and to build that in the first place. And we have dialogues with a lot of these vendors, and we talk about our API usage, and we talk about, well, what can we do to we give them sometimes suggestions on API endpoints that would be handy. They sometimes expose private API endpoints to us that aren't available in other places, because that relationship is important.
It's an interesting, I don't think that gets talked about often enough. I mean, if you look at any SaaS product now, like if they don't have an integrations page either in the footer or up there, or pretty much everyone is like, here's our native integrations and here's Zapier as well, or whatever. But so clearly integrations and relationships with mutually beneficial relationships from common software within the stack is like a massive selling point. And for ScreenCloud, it's in the top 3,
of course.
But I wonder how much. I mean, I haven't heard many people talk about, here's the benefits to us of integrating with X, Y, and Z. But I don't hear many people talking about, and what's the benefits to them? Or are we actually, kind of, as I said, sort of leeching off them a bit? Like, it's a real consideration, because once they're in, you can't take it away. Well, it can be taken away from you.
Not without it being brutal.
And customers will feel conned.
Yeah.
And we have had certain services that we've relied upon, end of life and things like that. And you know what? It does create quite a lot of anger.
Oh, it's huge. I mean, absolutely. And on top of the difficulties of building on a third party's infrastructure, things can change. But to your point about what value do they get from it? Well, we've seen this. We know what value they get on, and primarily it's stickiness, right? When you have numbers from a system being fed into something that is visible, like all day, every day, by lots of people on the team, then you are baking in some sort of like dependence on this. And we have customers that come to us and said, oh, I was deciding between CRM tools or support tools and whatever else. And, we'd looked at X, Y, and Z, but because you guys integrate with them, we decided to go with that. And we could have it all in one place, right? Yeah. So that it is seen as something that is valuable to their customers. It's valuable to the customers, it's valuable to the third parties.
Interesting. It's fascinating. I mean, when we go to conferences, where are the people like that getting together to actually talk about this mutual benefit? Because we're all there sort of sat independently, but we're all codependent. I mean, if you couldn't put a Geckoboard dashboard on ScreenCloud, that would be bad for ScreenCloud. Like ScreenCloud would be like, well, hey, this is dashboards for screens, and hey, your screens, why is it not working together?
But vice versa, it's useful for us. You've got an audience there that use screens. It's such a beneficial kind of.
And also quite often ask us, what should we put on those screens? Because they have maybe one burning need, which might have come from on high or some random thing. Maybe it was an event, whatever it might be. but they're sort of going, well, that was cool, but what else could we use this for?
Well, we talked about the pioneer kind of stage for SaaS businesses. I think we're at the pioneer stage for a lot of this. Like, how do we broadcast important data to our teams in a I don't think the rules have been set yet. I don't think we have our MRR acronyms and all of that kind of stuff yet. I think there's still a lot of fluidity, and I think it is it's important that we take some leadership and be able to give good advice, because there's nothing worse than a dashboard full of crap, right? There's there's bad metrics which incentivize, put perverse incentives in place, and all of these are kind of elephant traps that people can fall into when they first look at this kind of thing. It becomes very, very difficult to moderate and be easy to get lost in that world. So we have to be able to guide.
The funny thing about data, I mean, I really, I've always been quite poor with numbers personally, and so I always thought that of data as being very literal, like, data is data, you can't really argue with it. And what I've begun to appreciate now is that actually how you calculate data and how the way that you form your metrics is actually up for massive debate in the same way that everyone else. I mean, we had this, and I'm not sure we've ever really got to it, but like, we still don't truly know what a churn is for ScreenCloud, because some customers, they use screens for either events or for seasonality or whatever it might be. So they will then pause or remove a screen when they're not using it. But then they'll give us a 10 out of 10 NPS score to say, brilliant, it's great. When my next event happens, I'll be putting the screens back on.
Yeah.
And so, but that obviously will mean that our MRR goes down because there's a reduced number of screens, and there's no, I mean, they say they'll use it in the future, but will they? And so we've really debated.
When does a pause become a cancellation?
Great question.
And so, but we have, like, there is the churn number, there is the contraction number, but actually how you decide to calculate that is very human. And I never really appreciated that. I just thought, churn's a churn, like, I've said no, so gone. But actually, it's very subtle.
Conversion rate, like, where do you measure conversion rate from? For us, we started trials, we got 30 days. We measured on day 35, so that allows for weekends, whatever else. But we know that only 60% of our customers convert by day 35 of their trial. Some of them, the other 40% can take another 60
it's
days.
Been a couple of years since I've been lead contact on sales, but now and again still, this is a couple of years later, I get people replying to a, hey, how was your trial email that I sent in 2016, 2017, going, hey, we're good to go now, Mark. I was like, all right,
ready
so
to pull the trigger. Waiting for this email.
A 720-day conversion rate. Quick, tell the Google Ads team.
It's
working.
It's the same with expansion. We know that we have a lot of expansion, but what we're not completely sure about yet is whether expansion is a natural part of onboarding, in which case is it really expansion? Because when you're looking at expansion, you kind of go, well, if people expand at a rate of X% a month and they do that forever and you extrapolate that out, then that looks great.
It starts to look ridiculous.
In reality, that will
really
never happen.
Reality, yeah.
But for us, people typically within 12 months will grow their business with us another 50%. But some of that I think is expansion, and some of that is probably just onboarding, because it's not straight away.
And they have to do some work.
And they can't just
building a dashboard, that's not. It's a great and simple tool, but you've still got to figure out, what do I want to show?
Oh, absolutely.
There's
a lot of work.
A group meeting. Maybe you've got to ask different people what they want.
First of all, you might have to sell it in, and then you design your dashboard, and your first dashboard is never the dashboard. It's up for debate, and then you have to iterate on that and drill holes in your wall and put up a TV.
How often is the first dashboard? Because when I first ever used Geckoboard, this was 2016 or 15, I think it was, when I was exploring the product to work with ScreenCloud. Basically, I just connected all my own social media accounts because it's the easiest thing I could do. And as I said, I'm so bad at numbers. I was like, all right, well, that'll do. Because I just wanted to see stuff and see if it worked. So is that kind of, obviously that would not have been what we wanted as a business, but Mark's Twitter follow account, crucial number.
Well, I think that speaks to a broad problem that we face and other in our category, software category face, and that is metric choice and again, this debate between universal rules versus the subtlety of every business is different. How often is the first dashboard the right dashboard? Almost never, I'd say. It's never my experience anyway.
It sounds like almost every customer I'm speaking to. I want numbers, but I'm not sure why.
And that can be a hard thing. That can be a hard thing to do. And I think I think there is definitely discipline around that. And we do see what best practice looks like a lot of the time. One of our customers, they before purchasing Geckoboard or trialing Geckoboard, they made what they called a ghetto board, which was just a low fidelity paper prototype, big sheet of paper with like post-its on it showing the metrics, right? This is this is our metric. And they were able to have a kind of a fairly like tight feedback loop. They were able to, this is before connecting any data sources, before like, it is about deciding what are the metrics that are most important to us as a business? Post-analysis, we know, like we've done the analysis. Now we know these are the key drivers. These are the key things we want to. These are our objectives, our goals, whatever else. How do we visualize that, or what do we put onto this dashboard? And so very low fidelity, get it up, something up there, cool. Allows a debate to happen, allows people to chip in without too much effort.
I have a random question because this came up yesterday in a meeting talking about data. So a customer had a key metric. We kind of mentioned it earlier. We won't say it on here because I think I'd probably screw up my NDAs.
Okay.
But it had this key metric that was fundamental to the business, but it was also a metric that they usually hit and rarely changes. Now, they were saying, well, we want to put that up on the screen. But the thing is, it hardly ever fluctuates. It's like, let's say you call it an SLA, right? Most people are 99.9. So if you put it 99.9 on the screen and it just stays there because, hey, great technology, really reliable, it basically hasn't changed. Does it lose value? It's still a key metric though, but has it lost its value?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, so is it a key metric? A key metric, all right, well, I suppose it comes down to definitions. Is it something that people in the business can actually impact, right? Is it something that that they can have a direct or somewhat indirect impact on that? If it is, then I think there's definitely a case for having it up there.
Right,
And I think if you wanted to be a bit more subtle about that, let's say it is uptime, let's say, and you wanted 3 nines, and you have that up there and you show it. Well, the value there could be in saying, well, how often over the last month have we had any downtime or whatever else, outages or whatever else. There could be something interesting at another layer deeper than that. Or you could say, if this drops below a certain figure, we want a warning. If it drops below, another figure, then it's like our hair's on fire. We need to do something about that.
Using it as a trigger.
You have to think about the behaviors, because if people can't impact it, then having a number up there, it might feel like a vanity metric, unless there's another purpose to that metric. And then there are valid other purposes to the metric, to showing metrics, showing data, showing stuff that isn't necessarily what people can impact. It also things that give people a bit of background to the business, the cadence of the business, whether that's hour by hour or day by day or week by week, all of this kind of stuff feeding in and being able to kind of allow people to get a feel for how things are going, good or bad or whatever else. Even if they can't directly impact it, it might help with other things. So the two big, we use jobs to be done framework at Geckoboard, the two big jobs that we try to solve are alignment and performance. So how do you align a disparate group of people who maybe are looking at different teams in the same organization? How do you ensure that we're all rowing in the same direction? And there's nothing like a very well crafted set of metrics that everyone rolls up to and can see, like that is there, that allows us to say these are the things that are important to us as a department or as a business, right? And to be able to put your finger on that and categorize it. But then performance is about closing a feedback loop. So you might be head of a support and you want to be able to see, okay, well, how many people have I got on live chat versus on telephones versus like support tools, whatever, or
spikes around an issue that
absolutely
can flag the product team.
Exactly, and you want to be able to spot opportunities, but also where things go wrong. But I guess what I'm trying to say, like metrics can definitely be vanity. You have to get vanity metrics that like, oh, look at how great we are, or the number of Twitter followers, whatever else. These are like classic examples. But I think they're just saying that a metric has to tie directly back to something that people can impact. I think it may be losing half of the story. I think there's a softer side to distribution.
In my experience, most customers are not even thinking in this way. They're literally, I think they're thinking, okay, business leadership has said we need to be more KPI driven. We need to be more metric driven. Like data's ruling the world. We need a data team because. And then people are kind of getting these briefs and they're going, well, ooh, and it's kind of they're just whacking stuff up there because, hey, it's data, great, we've got data, and actually what you're saying, like, I'm just not hearing many people who get it like that, including myself.
I think that happens after you have the we need data type of thing.
Yeah.
And I absolutely agree that there's a lot and I think there's a whole part of the market that capitalizes on people's guilt around not making the most of their data, right?
Data guilt.
Data guilt, and they're and you see this particularly in the quote unquote big data world now, kind of AI and ML and things like that. It's it's like that analyst I used to work with who used to say, if you can't convince, confuse, right? It is about how do you make the case for data? Oh, this is really complicated, and look at all these things you need to have in place and all that kind of stuff. And you need you need huge volumes, and don't you worry, we'll take care of it. Just just give us your money and we'll look after it. Actually, I think there's the other end of the spectrum is where it's most interesting. It's like most business, once they've gone through some sort of analysis, they have an intuitive understanding about what are the most important drivers of their business. And if they don't, it's a great opportunity to have that conversation because it can be very clarifying. It can be very, it can open up paths and ways of looking at things. But if you know those things, and you can get hold of those things, and you can show it to the people who can make decisions based on that, well, that's it. That is, I mean, there you have unlocked a substantial amount of the potential of data without having big data teams and a data strategy and all of that kind of stuff. And these things that I feel really are being forced down people's neck in a way that is unhelpful. And as a result, they end up with these big bloated systems that really aren't delivering anything of true value, although it's dressed up in smoke and mirrors.
It's because if you probably even Google image search dashboards, what you'll see is that classic thing of 50 screens in some kind of investment bank or stockbroking scenario where there's just graphs and stuff everywhere, and you're like, that's what data looks like. It's visualized. Just like when we talk about kind of digital signage and stuff, people, if they haven't mentioned Minority Report within the first 20 minutes, I'll probably bring it up. And be like, oh yeah, because everyone just wants to flick things around to 50 screens. Because no, they want to look at a screen for 2 seconds and go, oh yeah, I get it. Oh, it's that way. Cool. Not Tom Cruise going, let's solve a murder.
No, quite.
And we've got to just demystify it. And also data guilt, as someone who is openly bad at the numbers and stuff, I kind of feel that guilt of I need to be more data driven, but I'm terrible at this.
But what does that mean? How do I actually get a foothold here? And I think if we can say it isn't as scary, as intimidating as you may think it is, and I think a lot of people, precisely right. If you do a Google image search for business dashboards, your eyes will bleed. These are things these are not designed with human beings at their very core, right? They're not designed for how we have evolved a visual system to ingest data. They're not designed for that. These are tacked on to analysis products. And this idea of business dashboards have been bastardized and adulterated over 40 years now, such that people, if you asked a dozen different people what a dashboard was, you'd get a dozen different answers, at least a dozen different answers. And actually, if you can unwind that and bring back simplicity to it and bring the data to where people are, right, then that's I think that's the key to unlocking the potential of data.
And the idea of a dashboard, I mean, if you just think about the word dash, it's it's fast. You get the information quickly, but it has kind of evolved into something that you kind of perhaps you're supposed to pore over and kind of interrogate.
It's the starting point for analysis. This is where we start slicing and dicing, drilling down, and asking questions of that data. Now think about how we use the dashboard in our car. It's an entirely different way. You don't look at that data and slice and dice it and think about it as you're driving out. Yeah, right. I
just need to know how fast I'm going.
Right. Or is there an engine management warning light light on. Am I about to run out of fuel? And if your dashboard was obscured, somebody put something across that, or a piece of paper across your dashboard, you would necessarily drive in a different way. You would. And that is like, you would refuel more often for a start. You'd probably drive a little slower. You would probably, be a little bit more paranoid whether you're going over the speed limit or whatever else.
That's a really good analogy.
And so when you think about the dashboard, you glance down, you glance back up again. And this is how people use Geckoboards. They glance up, or other TV dashboards are available. They're not as good.
Nowhere near as good.
But they glance down. And so you have to design for those systems. And the problem is that other dashboards, like dashboards tacked onto products and whatever else, are designed with a more is more. This is a graphic design experiment. How do I make this data interesting or exciting or whatever else? And instead of infantilizing it, which actually just puts cognitive barriers in the way of interpretation, if you design it thoughtfully for our visual cortex and how it ingests that data, you can actually make something that is functionally incredibly efficient at delivering huge amounts of data to people who may not necessarily be comfortable with data. And we talk about they used to talk about a pre-attentive processing. So they would be able to look at a dashboard or a set of data and understand it in less than 250 milliseconds, which is the time it takes you to consciously decide to move your eye from one place to another. If you can do that, you can grok that data, you're removing cognitive barriers. It's not somebody scratching their chin looking at a set of data. It is, I look and I understand and I can get back to my business. And I think that's the exciting part. That breaks down barriers.
You're like the Brian Cox of dashboards.
Yeah, I might just put that on my LinkedIn profile.
I was like, I'm excited. I want to do more data.
But I think it speaks to the potential of humanizing it. Not further machination. It's actually opening it up to the human beings, and it's that at that point where you could get, if data genuinely has a seat at the table, if data is genuinely part of the cadence of the business, and people can see that and they're not intimidated by it, if you can do that, and then you add the human spark of creativity and understanding and those big leaps forward, you will overcome the propensity to settle on local optimums, and you will be able to look at global optimums and be able to say, okay, how can we take the best of being informed about something and that creative spark that humanity can bring to something.
I think beautifully articulated. I was like, I'm sold, man.
You already are, so your customers are already.
Yeah. Well, I'm forward now. Come on, team. If you're watching, seriously, geckoboard.com. Get in there, get working, make this stuff real.
I think that's. I mean,
don't make a shitty dashboard just because you think a bank would.
Yeah. We said we'd do 30 to 40 minutes, and we said that we talk about platforming, but actually I think we've spoken for quite a bit longer, and we've ended up going down the data route, which is probably not that surprising given the nature of what we're talking about. But it's been really great, really interesting. I mean, we could go on for another couple of hours, I'm sure. But thank you so much for coming in and sharing your experiences.
Really brilliant. Really one of the best ones we've ever done, because I think it's good, we didn't do it.
Yeah, someone else talking for a change.
That was a genuine pleasure.
Cool.
Yeah,
cheers. Thank you
so
much.
Cheers, Paul.
Thanks.